Well, hello, Kubernetes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Arun Gupta. I work for Amazon. This is the Kubernetes community meeting and will be posted publicly on YouTube. So please be mindful what you say, what you wear, what you hear, what you eat, everything is being recorded. Now, as a quick courtesy, please mute when you are not speaking. So we're going to get started with the agenda. Usually, well, before that, actually, do I have a note taker? We need somebody to be able to take notes for the meeting. Going once. This is a very fortunate opportunity for you to be a note taker. Going twice. If not, then I guess George becomes my default note taker. George, okay with you? Okay, thank you so much. All right, then we'll get rolling. There is no demo this week, but we have a pretty packed agenda. We're going to do a release update. We have 4 SIG updates, so we added 1 more SIG this week. We have steering committee updates and then announcements and shoutouts. Usual format, but pretty packed agenda. So I request you to keep within your time limit. Tim, are you online?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, perfect. Give us an update about release 112.
Yeah, so our release 112, the main things to note that are listed there in the minutes for people to read, but basically the summary is we're pretty much halfway through the release cycle and time is flying by. 26 days to code freeze. Code freeze will be September 4th, and our release target then is 3 weeks after that, September 25th. We're looking to cut a beta next week and create the 112 release branch. We'll also be enabling CI on that. That branch will be fast forwarded regularly to the master branch's content. And then we're looking for SIGs to keep a high level of attention on keeping our CI signal green for the release master blocking and release master update branches. And that's about it.
What? No.
Does anybody have questions for Tim? All right, I guess we'll just keep moving along in that case. 1910 was released 5 days ago.
For the golf thing.
Hey, Jeff Cunningham, can you mute? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I will.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was wondering if there's a question or a background noise. All right. Release 1910 was done 5 days ago. I'm wondering if there's anybody to provide an update on that. Okay, 110 patch release was done about 10 days ago, so that was probably covered last meeting. 111.2 I saw came out literally yesterday, so I'm wondering if anybody can provide an update on that. All right, I guess all efforts are focused on the major release of 112 at this point of time, and thank you, Tim, for all the dates and everything in the meeting minutes. We'll jump to the SIG updates now. So the order that I have listed in the agenda, the first one is SIG scalability. Sham, are you online?
Go ahead. So, okay.
Well, I was looking for Sham first. Sham Jerry Gunta from SIG scalability.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, seems like Sham is, I'm not hearing from Sham. We'll keep moving. And once again, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. It creates a background noise for everyone. So Sham is not here. We'll come back to him and I'll ping him in Slack as well in the meanwhile. SIG architecture. Brian, can you give us an update on SIG architecture?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Grant. SIG architecture has moved its meeting time. For people who weren't aware, it's now immediately following this community meeting on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time. We are creating a new way of tracking work, and SIG architecture does a number of things, including providing consultation on significant changes to Kubernetes. A lot of those take the form of API reviews and KEP reviews or consultation. So Jace, the co-chair of SIG architecture, created some tracking boards. We have a repo in Kubernetes SIGs called architecture tracking. And we have 3 project boards there. One is for HepC tracking, one is for API review tracking, and one is for conformance test review tracking. SIG architecture needs to approve any additions or removals from the set of conformance tests for Kubernetes certification. And we're trying to find ways to better track that work. GitHub notifications pretty much don't work at all, at least for me. And we have a number of things to track that cross repositories, like HepCs are in the community repo, and most API changes are in the Kubernetes repo, but not all of them. So we're creating some project boards. So if you actually want to get onto the SIG architecture radar, the best way to do that is going to be to get it into the project boards, and then if we need to schedule it into put it on the agenda for some SIG architecture meeting, we can start having that discussion. And definitely also feel free to use the Kubernetes SIG architecture mailing list to reach out to us. I mostly can't monitor Slack. So the mailing list is probably going to reach more of the relevant people. Today, as just one example, reviewing the runtime class proposal is on the agenda. The initial proposal went through some iterations and now is being brought to SIG architecture. And that pattern is going to be more and more common, especially for any new built-in APIs into the core. As we try to slow the rate of growth down, we're pushing back harder and harder on new compiled-in APIs and reviewing those more and more carefully. So anyway, we'll send out some emails to Kubernetes dev about the engagement model for SIG architecture as we finalize some of the details. So watch for that if you're making API changes. It's going to be relevant to you.
All right, thank you so much. Anybody has questions for SIG architecture or Brian? All right, thank you so much, Brian. Let me check if Sham is back on, is actually online. Sham Jerigunta, are you available from SIG Scalability?
Hi, yeah, I just joined the call.
Okay, very cool. So thank you, Sham. So Sham is going to provide a status update from SIG Scalability. Go for it, Sham.
So I'm not sure how much of, like, when was the last update given for SIG Scalability? I remember Bob did it a while ago. So forgive me if I probably repeat some of the stuff. So I guess in the last month or so, there are a few things that that SIG Scalability has been working on. One area is improving tools to do performance testing. So we are building this new tool called Cluster Loader. It's in the perf tests repository, and it's basically a tool for generating workload and stress testing Kubernetes clusters. It's a way of declaratively defining your workload. So you say something like create 1,000 deployments, and each deployment uses 2 secrets and create 500 services and things like this. So you basically declaratively define that, and you provide the rate at which you want to generate this load and the pattern with which you want to generate this. And then Cluster Loader is going to take care of populating your cluster with all that. And you can also add measurements to like get some kind of SLIs or measures latencies and things like this. So that's one of the things. And the other one is Perf Dash, which is our performance dashboard. And we've kind of launched like V1.0 release of the performance dashboard, and it's publicly visible to everyone. And it's basically a dashboard having various kinds of metrics that we get from our scalability CI jobs. and we run scalability jobs from a scale of 100 all the way till 5,000. And we measure some of these, and they should be available on, let me actually quickly share the link with you. So this shows historical data on how different metrics look like. The main ones are basically the like resource usages of various components and latencies of cold startup, API calls, and things like these. So that's basically what I have from tool side, and there's some performance work as well, which either we are actively doing or have delegated to other SIGs. And there are a couple of main ones. So one of them is in 1.12, we've moved kubelets to watching secrets as opposed to periodically polling for them, which was how it was till 1.11. And that was one of the biggest scalability bottlenecks at large scale, because with 5,000 nodes, you basically send a huge herd of these calls from, because each node sends these periodic get secret calls, and that gets multiplied by 5,000. So that's a lot. So we've now replaced it with watch, and I made some preliminary experiments, and it seems like we're able to scale to as much as 100,000 namespaces right now. On a reasonably big cluster with 32 cores. And so that's one of the improvements. And the other one, which is still work in progress, is cheaper node heartbeats. So this is also another problem which happens for large clusters, is that right now kubelet sends a heartbeat for a node every 10 seconds. So for a 5,000 node cluster, this basically means every 10 seconds you have 50,000 edits to the node object. So when this gets stored in etcd, because etcd stores revision history, it occupies a lot of space, and that is that is a serious limitation for large clusters. So Wojtek was working on KEP, and he submitted this KEP to move the heartbeats to a different API, which basically reuses what we have for lease. So it's basically moving the heartbeats stuff to a new API, so that the node objects don't form too many revisions in etcd, but they're dedicated heartbeat objects for heartbeat. There's still work going on at this point. I think he's added the new API already, and the ball is now in the hands of Signode to make changes on the kubelet side. And yeah, so these are the main performance work. And the final one is about our CI testing. We are trying to deflake our jobs, and because there are quite some flakes which are unnecessarily failing some of our large scale tests, which we don't want, because those are expensive and they give us really valuable signal. And they're also not too frequent because they take quite a while to run. So we are kind of deflaking those tests and making them more robust, and also potentially solving a regression, a scalability regression, which we think might be in 1.12, but we are yet to get there. So yeah, I guess that's all from scalability for now.
All right, there are a couple of questions in the chat window. So one of them is about Jupyter integration. So maybe you can answer that here quickly if there's a quick one, or you can answer them back in the chat window as well. All right, any questions, other questions for SIG scalability? All right, awesome. Then we will keep moving along. And thank you for everybody who is actually pitching in with the notes. I'm sure Paris can give out t-shirts to them. Let's go to SIG CLI. Sean Sullivan, you shared some slides. And George, I believe you have the slides ready to go. All right, bingo. The slides. Sean, you're on.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm Sean Sullivan from Google, and I'll give you guys a quick update on the command line interface of SIG. So just a quick overview. The SIG CLI it's responsible for kubectl and related tools. And today I'm going to go over a couple of items, including what we've been doing on kubectl. I want to talk a little bit about Kustomize, which is a new sub-project in SIG CLI. And then just a quick update on our charter, which is out for feedback. So one of the major efforts for SIG CLI has been trying to thin the client and move more of the complicated logic into the API server. This particular issue has been going on for several years. So I've included a link that actually points to this issue on GitHub that's been going on since 2015. One of the major efforts that we've accomplished to address this issue is moving some of the more complicated printing logic into the API server so that the types and the fields don't have to be known on the client. That has been moved to the server, and it's been available since version 1.11. Another effort, which many of you have probably already heard about, is some of the complicated apply logic that has been coded into kubectl is also in progress being moved to the API server. Another big area of effort for our SIG has been extensibility, specifically with plugins. So I have a link here for our Kubernetes enhancement proposal for plugins, which was created by Juan Vallejo at Red Hat. I also mentioned or have a link to his implementation for that PR. We're targeting alpha for our next release at 1.12. And just to give you a quick overview, these plugins are meant to be Git-style plugins in the where a particular binary will be in a path, and the environment and flags and parameters will be passed to that binary if the compiled-in kubectl doesn't understand that, and it will find that plugin using a naming convention. I suggest you look at the KEP to find out more about that. In order to support the plugin authors, we have refactored what we call a generic CLI options library. It hasn't been pulled out of core yet, but we're in the process of trying to provide support for plugin authors with this particular library. And then I also give a link to what we call Crew, which is a proposal for managing plugins. So the KEP that I mentioned before is how the plugins work, and they don't address any of the management issues associated with plugins. There's a separate proposal for that. Okay, so I'd like to, for those of you who haven't heard about Kustomize, it is a new project in order to manage our declarative config in a way that's different, that uses patches and overlays instead of templating like Helm. And so, yeah, I didn't want to go too deeply into this, just to let you know that this is a new sub-project within SIG CLI. Actually, we have one of the major authors here, Jeff Reagan.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer it. You can also just Google Kustomize with a K. It's the first result. And it's a great tool to just focus. It's laser focused on the notion of generating different environments like productions and staging from a common base. So it's just, that's exactly what it does.
Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to mention before we finish that the first version of our charter is out for feedback, and we have a link to that. It's obviously in the community repo. And so I got some links here, and that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions? I see in the chat, someone's asking what CRUISE stands for. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'll have to look.
Can you paste those links into the notes for today?
Yes, I can.
You also have.
Thank you, Sean. There are a couple of more questions in the chat window.
Right.
Asking how does it compare to Helm?
Right. So how does it compare to Helm, or is it competing within the same space? Again, I'll defer to Jeff on that.
Yeah, but Brian might want to weigh in too.
Or I can talk about it. Yeah, so Kustomize provides a way to express, for the most part, repackages a lot of existing kube control functionality, which previously was imperative. Like you could say kube control patch something something, or kube control label something something. So we had a lot of requests for expressing a bunch of these commands, creating config maps, creating secrets, and so on declaratively. So Kustomize enables you to do that. And effectively, what were previously separate commands or command line flags, you can put into a single file. So that addresses about I don't know, 8 to 10 long-standing requests in kube control. Now, in terms of the actual capabilities of what you can use it for, and that really depends on the use case, but what it's really targeted for is facilitating composition, where you actually need to merge information about your configurations from multiple input sources. And for people who don't really want a different abstraction than the API resources, they actually just need to combine information. It's really targeted at that use case. And it's unopinionated about how the patches get generated or how the bases get generated, or whether you just write them by hand. It's a tool for merging those things together using the exact same schema as the API. So there is potentially some overlap for Helm. There's also a blog post from Vic Iglesias about how you can use the two together. If you need to do light customization, and you're familiar with the Kubernetes API, Kustomize provides an easy way to do that.
Thanks, Brian. So there's one other question that I'll address and then sign off, which is, why is the repo under Kubernetes SIG? Is it a different SIG? No, it's the same SIG. It's that my understanding.
I can answer that as well.
I think Brian. Yeah, go ahead.
So if you look in the community repo, there's a document called Kubernetes repositories.md that describe this. Basically, we are moving away from the Kubernetes incubator org, and we created this Kubernetes SIGs org to give SIGs, make it easier for SIGs to create repositories for their ongoing work as needed. As we move away from a monolithic repository, Kubernetes, to many repositories, I think we have over 100 now, having a single GitHub org proved to be challenging from a management perspective. So Kubernetes SIGs is for SIGs to use as needed for the various sub-projects, and it's intended to have a pretty low overhead way of managing those repositories, creating new ones, deprecating old ones, and so on. So that's all it is.
Thank you. I think that answers the question as well. Very good. Thank you, Sean. If anybody has a question, please feel free to reach out to Sean. His Slack ID will add it to the speaker notes as well, or to that meeting agenda. Now, usually we have 3 SIG updates, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the call, because there is no demo this week, we have taken the liberty to add actually a 4th SIG update. So I'm happy to invite Nishi Davidson, my partner in crime at Amazon, to talk about SIG AWS. Nishi, you are on?
Yeah, I'm here, Arun. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll just go ahead and share my slides. Share my screen. Okay, great. This is very timely because I'm actually using Kubernetes SIGs in order to better organize SIG AWS. So Brian's last comment is extremely valid. So SIG AWS has specifically focused on Kubernetes integrations on EC2. But as we are increasing our focus upstream, we also want to organize all the sub-projects under SIG AWS and improve our contributions upstream. As a general commitment, we are looking at documentation and testing, where we can do a lot of uplifting and improve the quality of whatever is done in the Kubernetes code base. But other than that, we have organized certain sub-projects. So my goal is to give an overview of what those sub-projects are. And I'm representing the SIG leads today. That is Bob Wise, Justin SB, and Chris Nova. So the first sub-project I wanted to highlight is the HepC Authenticator project. It's actually a tool that allows using AWS IAM credentials to authenticate to a Kubernetes cluster. It's integrated with AWS IAM STS, and it sends pre-signed bearer tokens to enable authentication on the controller side. The authorization that is enabled on the Kubernetes side can be whatever you want. In Amazon EKS, we are using this tool, and we use RBAC on the Kubernetes to complete the authorization process. So we renamed the project from HepC Authenticator to AWS IAM Authenticator, and actually followed the process that Brian was just describing and moved it to Kubernetes SIG because it allows us to manage the release cycle better. There are some AWS doc updates that we still need to complete upstream, but we are trying to work with users in order to improve the tool, and this project is being jointly maintained by HepTO and AWS EKS engineers. Moving on, the second sub-project that we created was AWS ALB Ingress Controller. This was also a project that was donated to us by CodeOS and Ticketmaster. It's being used in production at Ticketmaster for over a year. We have some customers like Blue Jeans and Freshworks working on it, using it right now in their Kubernetes environments. Essentially, the ALB Ingress Controller watches for ingress events on Kubernetes, and it will create AWS ALBs in order to do so. The AWS ALBs that are created can both be internet-facing as well as internal. Today, the ingress traffic for all the controller managed resources can reach the Kubernetes node through node port. This does create some additional hops for customers who are using ingress controllers. So we're evaluating options and designs that allows users to directly reach the pod that they're trying to target instead of using the node port model. There are also multiple other feature requests from customers, and we are actively working with Ticketmaster and CodeOS community engineers to improve this project. This project is not officially integrated in Amazon EKS, but we hope that at some point we can make it stable and add it to Amazon EKS. The third sub-project, this we are working with Justin SB and Seth Pollack from the community. Essentially, it uses AWS KMS and works with something called envelope encryption. What we're doing is we are running a KMS plugin as a gRPC server. It generates local DEX, and it can cache something called a key encryption key that can be generated from a remote KMS provider. In this case, it will be AWS KMS keys. And then these DEX can be used to encrypt any secret that's coming into the control plane, and it's saved into etcd. So right now, Justin SB and Seth Pollack have given us a good start in terms of writing the code. What we are doing is trying to figure out what could be the scale implications. Is the caching of the DEC enough, or how can we do key rotation, and what could be the limitations of this particular design? So this is the third sub-project that we are focusing on. Again, an open source project, which we hope we can take into production. The fourth proposal is around AWS CSI driver, which we are working with Red Hat and Docker on. This is a proposal that allows the CSI driver to integrate with EBS. The community has helped us figure out a bunch of issues that we need to fix on the EBS side, which is a very useful feedback. But simultaneously, we're also figuring out how to improve the interface, and this is in a proposal stage. We hope that we can get the CSI driver to a stable path, hopefully in 1.13, and then move it as a sub-project into SIG AWS. So the folks involved here are Jan, Hemant, Deep, and the EBS team. And if you guys want to be involved, the Google Doc is available and you can make your comments or leave your thoughts there. I also want to talk about pod identity access. This is an ongoing discussion. We talked about the AWS IAM Authenticator, which allows identity to be available on the Kubernetes worker nodes. We're working on a model with the community that allows identity injection inside the pod directly. So there are multiple community proposals here, Kube2IAM, IAM for Kube, KIM, and we also have our own model of looking at OIDC and integrating service account tokens into the API server. Our team, Micah from the Amazon EKS team, is working on this along with Nick Turner and some of the community folks from USwitch. So we don't have a clear path ahead on this, but this is a sub-project which is under proposal right now. If you have any inputs or thoughts, again, the Google Docs are available. Please feel free to comment. The sixth project that we are talking about, again, this is a cloud provider AWS project, which is focused on taking CCM, which is the Cloud Controller Manager, which is currently in Tree, out of Tree. Currently it's a sub-project in SIG AWS. We are completely focused on making sure that we work with SIG Cloud Provider, figure out the governance model, which is normal, and become a part of the whole SIG Cloud Provider effort. As a strong participant of SIG Cloud Provider, we have introduced documentation kept, which is an ongoing problem with AWS. There are lots of folks interested, but the documentation is a little bit not complete, and we're trying to make sure that we have certain standards established, and we will be the first one to follow on AWS. And then we hope with support of Google and OpenStack, we can improve the documentation standard for both in-tree and out-of-tree CCM implementation. We're also working on the out-of-tree CCM cloud provider code base and also looking at how to enable end-to-end testing. So that's it from me. This was a quick summary of all the activities we're doing in SIG AWS, and hopefully it was useful.
Thank you, Nishi. Do you have any questions for Nishi or SIG AWS? All right, I saw an email from Chris yesterday about AWS Cluster API, and she also asked for 30 seconds, but because all the SIG leads have done a fantastic job of giving an update, we will be generous and give a minute to give the update on Cluster API implementation details. Chris.
Awesome. Thanks for my very generous minute here. So yeah, this is kind of a sub-project of AWS, but I think it technically started out of SIG Cluster Lifecycle, but it's kind of a hybrid project that goes and spans a little bit of both SIGs. There is an email in the SIG AWS and SIG Cluster Lifecycle mailing list, but we are working on building out a Cluster API implementation in the Kubernetes SIGs repo. I'll add a link to the doc here in a second. There is a main function in the repo already, although it doesn't do anything. And we just sent out like the doodles and docs starting work. Please come and give us your input email. So if you have questions or concerns, now is a really great time to get involved. Also, we have a call for action. We're trying to document user experiences on AWS from everything from experience that we learned when we were writing COPS to Kubicorn to any experience other folks have had as well to build like a common knowledge base. So if folks have anything they want to share, that would be helpful. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ping me or come to the meetings. That's all.
All right. Any questions for Chris? Okay, awesome. Nishi, you can unshare your screen, because the SIG AWS updates are done. So that we can switch back to the active speaker. All right, thank you so much. All right, so the SIG updates are done with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to a new section that we have added this time at least. Aaron would like to provide an update from steering committee. Aaron, you are on.
Hi, everybody. Aaron Grickenberger here, your friendly SIG testing lead, steering committee guy, and sundry other things. It's been a while since the steering committee talked to you about stuff, so I kind of wanted to share with you where we were at. I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to experience a quick mini steering committee meeting. Here we go. So the way the steering committee runs our meeting is we use this handy dandy project board. Anybody should be able to take a look at this. It's in the Kubernetes steering repo. Let's see here. Make sure chat's cool. All right, put that over there. So the way we run the meeting is we walk through the steering board. We look at the column that's in progress. So the first thing in progress is steering committee elections. So this is where I get to tell you that we've remembered that steering committee elections are supposed to happen every year, and all that stuff we were supposed to sort out immediately after getting elected, we're almost done sorting out. The main criteria, the main thing we need to sort out right now is what the criteria is for members of standing. Members of standing are people who can actually vote in the election. Last year, you may remember we looked at owners' files and then kind of had a like, please just email us if you think you weren't included in the initial list, and we'll find reasons to include you. This year, we're trying to do something that's a little more data-driven. So I also got to bump graph of the week to give this update, so I'm actually gonna sneak one in here. If you go over to DevStats, there's a graph, or I guess it's more like a table called Developer Activity Counts by Repository Group. We're gonna take a look at people who have made contributions. Those are like anything that causes a GitHub event to happen: opening an issue, commenting on an issue, opening a pull request, submitting code, helping us triage issues. We're going to take a look at how many people have done this across every repository that belongs to the Kubernetes project, not just KK. We're going to look at this from a rolling window of the past year. And so we're going to take a look at this table, export it, and basically cut it off at the, I think it's 50 or 60. We still need to drill down on that specifically, but we're going to say basically anybody who hasn't done at least 60 contributions isn't sufficiently invested in the project to have a say in who should be running the project. So if you want more details on that, you'll be hearing about them because we've gotten in touch with Paris Pittman and George Castro, and I think they were volunteering Josh Burkus as a third person, so we can sort of de-bottleneck those two folks who have enough community management duties to do. And we're going to start getting out the vote. So look forward to hearing more about that. Next thing on our agenda, there's been a lot of confusion about what working groups are. We're going to start with documenting how they should be formed. Jace put together this wonderful Google Doc here that a number of folks in steering and not in steering have had the opportunity to take a look at. We're going to submit this as a pull request to the community repo and work on fleshing out what working groups are and how you working group in the context of governance of the whole project. I signed up to do this and I literally haven't done it yet, so I'm so sorry. But we've realized that sometimes what steering committee needs to do, especially in the context of charters and project-wide communication, we need to make sure that SIGs are kept up to date and that SIGs also feel like they have a point of contact into the steering committee. Informally, this has already happened with a number of SIGs because we're all pretty active in the community and we are all either chairs or leads or sub-project owners in a variety of SIGs, but we do have a couple gaps. So as part of the effort to review charters for every SIG, which I'll get to shortly, we put together this spreadsheet where we made sure we had at least 2 people assigned to every SIG who's going to be responsible for reviewing their charters. And so I'm just going to take that and turn it into liaisons for every SIG. Don't consider this the final list. It's a spreadsheet. I hate them. I'm instead going to turn this into something that gets generated and dumped into every SIG's README in the community repository. There may be some juggling of who the people are because we'd like to make sure that there's at least one person who has expertise in the SIG and one person who doesn't. Code of Conduct Committee. I have no idea if the members of the Code of Conduct Committee are here, but this is something that Michelle Nurali really helped push through the steering committee. I want to just give a huge shout out to her for actually making that happen. Loosely speaking, the process was open candidates, but closed voting. We ended up voting, and I can go to the poll request over here that actually added the members. And so your Code of Conduct Committee will be Jay Singer Dumars, Paris Pittman, Eric Paris, Carolyn Van, I can't pronounce your last name, Carolyn, I'm so sorry. And Bradamant. Who's Bradamant? I forget. I should know this. Pardon?
Jennifer Rondo.
Jennifer Rondo, of course. How could I forget? Has done wonderful work on the release in docs stuff. So we're going to have an inaugural meeting with a couple members of the steering committee who have capital O opinions on this, but basically the Code of Conduct Committee is going to be empowered to do their thing. What is their thing, you might ask? Well, if I go to community, if I go to committee Code of Conduct, the README tells you some things, the bootstrapping process sort of tells you how it's going to get formed, and then upon appointment, what their thing is. And it's kind of much like the steering committee where their job is to figure out what their job is and let us all know what that is. Okay, finally, the one that gives me the most brow wrinkles, the charter's meta issue. So I have this like over/under bet on whether or not we're actually going to, within a year of the steering committee having been elected and formed, actually have all the SIGs describe what it is that they are in fact in charge of. Like what is in scope for that SIG? What is out of scope for that SIG? How do you SIG? There's been a bunch of back and forth and a lot of opinions. And I think where we've landed is we're really most concerned about trying to get an initial pass on scope from a variety of SIGs. We put together a template that kind of lays out the standard pattern for governance that we anticipate most SIGs would want to follow, where there are chairs who are responsible for running the SIG, there are tech leads who are responsible for technical decisions, and sundry other things. We had a couple SIGs approach us early on with charters to be reviewed. We divvied up the steering committee members to make sure there were people dedicated to reviewing those. And then it's kind of been a whole lot of hurry up and wait. So I apologize for how slow we've been going. This is part of why we're trying to do the steering committee liaison thing. The idea here is this stuff doesn't seem to happen unless humans kind of get together in a room, virtual or otherwise, and hammer this stuff out. So expect to see steering committee members showing up at the SIG meetings for which they are responsible to help push this stuff through. The reason you may not have seen a large push for this just yet is because we're still kind of trying to figure it out ourselves. So we started with a few examples that came our way, or early starters, what have you. So I can point you to 3 SIGs that have had their charters merged, and I already have notes on like what needs to be done to improve those charters slightly. So SIG Auth, for example, did a great charter. We'll just take a view of it real quick. Their charter tells us what is in scope, both in terms of code and binaries and in terms of processes. They also do a good job of telling us what is out of scope, and there's really not a whole lot else to talk about. This is ideal for us. This is going to help us focus on the what. The how is documented and the template. If we go look at that, let's see if this link actually works. This template basically says, here's how most SIGs are going to run. You're just going to kind of pick and choose from this, or you're going to override this. The one thing this SIG did not do is outline all of their sub-projects in sigs.yaml so that it helpfully shows up on their README, right? I don't see a sub-project section here that describes all of the repositories with all of the code that they own. So we're looking forward to that sort of stuff from all SIGs. So I went through and just sort of tried to update this issue as best as I could with the state of things as I have seen them. There are these that are merged. Here's sort of the next batch that we're trying to push through. And then I would anticipate, as we have gotten these merged, we're going to start looking at charters that got merged without the steering committee really being involved or really having its act together on this sort of standard template, as well as SIGs that have kind of still got to figure out what the scope is before we're ready to open it up to broader steering committee review, as well as SIGs that just are kind of waiting for us to get our act together and tell them exactly what you do and how you do it, and so on and so forth. So this is messy, this takes a while, we're still figuring it out. We consider this to be an iterative process. Even though it's taken us this long to get here and get everything merged when we do, it's not as though that is all set in stone. It's more to help all of us collectively understand what the project is and who owns which pieces of the project. Last thing I want to mention, well, no, not quite the last thing. So go back to the meeting agenda. All right, so I already plugged the steering committee elections. Great. One other thing I'll plug is the Meet Our Contributors Steering Committee edition. We already had one a couple weeks ago. I don't have a link to it offhand. We're going to have another one September 5th at 1 p.m. Pacific time, where a bunch of members of the steering committee are going to be there. If you want to ask questions of us, please join the Meet Our Contributors channel on Kubernetes Slack. We will do our best to answer them. Finally, we had a discussion last week about sort of non-steering committee participation. And I wanted to start illustrating that with this project board here is actually something that nobody on the steering committee put together. Jace Singer-Dumars helpfully volunteered to help us run our meetings a little bit better and keep track of things a little bit more efficiently. And we really, really welcome that. We find ourselves often going back and forth in meetings over what's the state of things or who said what when or who documented what. And he's been pretty good about keeping us honest, and would love to help keep us honest in the moment when we're asking ourselves these questions instead of having to yell at the recording of us about 2 hours later. So this sort of made us think that there are often times where we kind of could benefit from having people who aren't on the steering committee come and participate in our meetings. Code of Conduct Committee would be another great example. And just in general, the steering committee is a bunch of really overcommitted, overworked individuals who really want to get everything done as soon as possible, but also have 20 other things to get done. And so as we kind of look back and wish we had made more progress, we realize, generally speaking, the times when we make the most progress are when people outside of the steering committee bring to us fully baked and well-formed proposals, be that on how the project should be run, processes, or the formation of new sub-projects. So just one example I wanted to call out that I thought was kind of cool was Christoph Blecker basically put together a sub-project under the contributor experience SIG. Sort of noticing that the way we manage our GitHub organizations, permissions, branches, bots, labels, everything is kind of inconsistent. And we've been seeing this general trend of other open source projects with kind of haphazard GitHub management get compromised. I think Homebrew was maybe the latest one, although I personally am willing to blame that on Jenkins. And so he put together this proposal and wanted to make sure that the steering committee had a say in it because it was kind of about the delegation of authority and powers throughout the project. Remember, our job is not to do, our job is to give other people the ability to do. And he also made sure that security was folded in and so on and so forth. So anyway, just consider this a call for participation. If you feel like the steering committee is not doing enough or you have ideas about how things should be done, we welcome and encourage proposals and participation. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and ask if there are any questions.
With regards to the last item for Chris's change across the orgs, where should folks go to file issues as they see things, as I have seen just today? So if George doesn't mind, I could roll on through to my other updates because I did actually want to talk specifically about the GitHub management subproject.
Let's see if we can wrap up the steering committee updates, and then we can jump over to the announcement sections, and then you can talk about it over there. Any questions for steering committee or Aaron?
So Josh has a question. Can non-steering committee members join the actual meetings? No, we're not necessarily inviting the public at large to come in, but we do want to make sure that we have the ability to invite people to the meeting if they have something that we as a group need to discuss collectively. And we figure it's better to have that discussion in a public and recorded forum as opposed to, in a mailing list. We figured like that high bandwidth experience is a lot more valuable if everybody gets to see it. But we want to make sure that it's a focused group so that we can drive forward.
All right, thank you. And George also posted a note that they post videos after the meeting on the YouTube channel. So in case you want to watch it post the meeting, you can certainly do that too. Awesome. So let's move to the announcement.
Sorry, office hours next week at the usual time. Looking for one volunteer for the West Coast edition. Please click through. SIG leads, the update for you to give the SIG updates like we had this meeting has been updated throughout the rest of the cycle. Please follow the link. And if we can't get you scheduled, just reach out to us and we'll figure something out. And we're looking for more community demos. We're actually down to only 2 people in the demo. See the top of the document that we're taking notes in if you want to demo something for this community meeting. And that's basically it. Back to you, Aaron.
Okay, so let's talk about the GitHub management subproject, since Tim had a question about it and I had it on the agenda. Going to share the screen again. Going back to the meeting notes, we're taking a look at GitHub management subproject. So I'm basically going to talk about it because Christoph has a standing conflict with this meeting, but I kind of got to give full credit to him for putting this through. What is the project? What does it do? In the community GitHub management subproject responsibilities, you can consider this like our subproject's mini charter, including what we are responsible for and what we are not responsible for. This one's going to be kind of a fuzzy area because when people think of GitHub, they kind of think of maybe GitHub labels and automation and stuff, and contributor experience and SIG testing are still kind of where we talk about the ideal processes and the ideal automation to implement that. However, the GitHub management subproject may consume some of that automation to implement those policies and processes. There are specific policies and processes we care about, things like who should have org ownership, who should be in charge of, what are the policies for accepting integrations and services and third-party OAuth apps, things of that nature. Who is the GitHub administration team? Who should you bug in person if you need to like throttle somebody by the neck, although pretty please don't do that. We chose a group of 6 people who are, well, okay, unfortunately, mostly Pacific, but we did try to distribute around the globe. So we do have some kind of time zone coverages. Not all of them are from the same company, so we have distribution in that way. We have folks from contributor experience and folks from SIG testing because of the automation and the policies and processes. So we feel like this is a good mix of people to have org ownership rights. Anybody who is not these 6 people no longer has org ownership privileges over any of the GitHub orgs that we manage. What are the GitHub orgs that we manage? It's these 7 GitHub orgs right here. There are a bunch of non-actively used GitHub orgs that we kind of squat on, but we're not really actively using them or managing them. These are the ones that we want to make sure we consistently have the right policies in place for and management set up for. Okay, So given that I just said we removed org ownership privileges from a whole bunch of people, we may have broken people's workflow. We're not entirely sure. Like, we tried to do the responsible thing by opening up a GitHub issue, describing what we were doing and why we were doing it. We tried to notify everybody who was going to be affected. We had kind of a conversation to try and answer some questions and answers. One of those concerns brought up was like, well, I kind of need ownership privileges to do my job. Could you please describe to me, like, how am I going to do my job now that I have to ask you to do it? Can I get some sort of SLO for what this means? So we opened up a pull request to document our SLOs. So under GitHub management, opening a request, which, whatever, I'll let you navigate to that. The short version of that is we just ask you to open an issue on github.com/kubernetes/org. We set up issue templates so that depending on what you're asking for, you can file a different kind of issue, which will have the sorts of information that we ask of you for these different requests. So like one thing that is kind of in flux for now, people joining the Kubernetes GitHub organization asking for membership, I think as documented right now is kind of through contributor experience, and people send an email to a Google group, and we'll eventually get to a point where we'd rather people open up issues on this repo so that we can fulfill them that way. But if you want to add Travis or Circle CI to your repo and it's being blocked or prevented for some reason and you want to go bug somebody about it, you go file an issue here under integrations, get started. And we have an issue template saying, yay, what do you want to do? Can we get some information about it? Can you tell us what you're trying to do and any additional information? Things like that. So that's the GitHub management sub-project. Any questions there?
Aaron, I'll give you one more minute to talk about the sub-projects part of it, and then we can move on to the next announcement and then shout-outs.
Yep, so sub-projects is pretty quick. I heard that described earlier in the meeting here. So sub-projects are a collection of 1 to n repos or packages that all make up a cohesive logical unit. We call it a sub-project because Kubernetes is the project. The other thing you're doing is underneath of that sub-project. As part of that, every single repository needs to have an owner's file at its root. That's going to help us understand who's in charge of this thing. Since we've opened up the number of GitHub orgs that we manage, we've identified there are a number of projects that don't yet have owner's files. I have opened up issues for all of these, and I will be nagging you again and again and again until this is closed. The other thing is, if you have a sub-project, if you have a repo that has an owner's file, you may not have actually added it to the sigs.yaml file, which sort of contains all the information about our project and is used to generate sig readmes. Nishi, for example, all the AWS sub-projects that you were talking about still yet haven't actually been added to sigs.yaml, so they don't show up in the sig AWS README. When you do that, there are a couple issues that can be closed here. So that's it. If I'm nagging you, here's why. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Ihor, last announcement, it is about sunsetting Kubernetes SIG service accounts. Are you there? Ihor? Okay, well, maybe cover this announcement maybe next week in that case. So what I want to do is I'm going to run through the shout outs this week. So the first one comes from Paris. Thanks to Tim Pepper, Jeffrey Sika, Benjamin Elder, Ruben Orders for great responses and their time on Meet Our Contributors yesterday. Solid examples of good mentors. And the next one comes from Aaron. Thanks to Morgan Bauer for his efforts in working with SIG testing to get service catalog all hooked up to Prow and Tide. Next one comes from Jeremy Rickard. What Aaron said, Tide and Prow and dope, and we love using the now. I unfortunately cannot capture the GIFs here. Next one comes from Tim Pepper. Thanks to shout out to George, Paris, Zoom, and any others who have been working for months to improve our meeting moderation abilities and best practices to better ensure our collaborations are constructive and resilient in the face of potential abuse. Next one comes from Aaron. Shout out to Matthias Birchie, hopefully I didn't butcher the name, for adding per repo label to our label sync bot. So you can add labels to your repo by PRing a file instead of making the change manually with admin access. Next one comes from George. Shout out to Andrew Chen for sorting out Netlify for the contributor site. Last one comes from Aaron. Shout out to Manjunath Kumatagi and DIMS. His name is Davanam Shrivas, but is definitely more popularly known as DIMS, for their push on multi-arc E2E test images. PPC 64LE is now passing node conformance, and there's a link. Thank you. We pretty much had a very packed agenda. Everybody did a great job in sticking to their time. I am barely able to give you 1 minute back. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Happy Thursday.